So these precepts and these refuges and this homage to our teacher, the Buddha, are an opportunity for us to inspire our minds to develop some energy in the mind, to feel some lifting of our usual, mundane, boring world into a realm that maybe makes us think a little bit more about the nature of this existence that we find ourselves in, and perhaps even question how we're living our life. Are we living it in accordance with the Dhamma? Are we taking the opportunity at every moment to develop our minds? And so this is a small introduction into the big picture theme that I want to explore with you today. I'm going to be sharing my screen on and off throughout the session. And as Terence mentioned, the theme of today's talk is Samvega and spiritual urgency. So some of you might have heard this term before. Perhaps you might know exactly what it means. Perhaps you only have a vague idea. If you want, you can put perhaps what you think it might be in the chat. And here we have this image of this person with their head on fire. Maybe you've heard these words in relation to a sutta. Maybe that will make you start thinking about what it actually is, this thing, Samvega. And I always like to begin with a bit of a vibe check, just to give you an indication of what the session is going to be about. If it wasn't bad enough, we have a person with their head on fire. This image, we're all going to die. This serious message, I've tried to deliver it here with a bit of a happy vibe. It's quite a difficult theme, death. So what does this have to do with Samvega, I wonder? So this is an image, one of my favorite images from the Atthadanda Sutta, where the Buddha talks about seeing the people of the world floundering like these fish in a shallow pool. And it's quite a beautiful sutta, so we'll just go through it very quickly. The Atthadanda Sutta, Bhante Sujato translates it as taking up arms. It says, peril stems from those who take up arms. Just look at people in conflict. I shall extol how I became stirred with a sense of urgency. So this sense of urgency, this is how Bhante Sujato is translating Samvega. He says, I saw this population flounder like fish in a little puddle. Seeing them fight with each other, fear came upon me. This world around is hollow. All directions are in turmoil. Wanting a home for myself, I saw nowhere unsettled. Even in settlements they fight, and seeing that, I grew uneasy. So this is the Atthadanda Sutta, this idea of uneasiness. I wonder if any of you have ever had this feeling of uneasiness in your own lives. Perhaps this sense of disquiet, this sense of dis-ease in your own life was something that propelled you onto the spiritual path. For me, I can remember one particular occasion when I was standing at a very busy intersection, and there's a subway station, there's busy streets, and it's peak hour, and there's people flooding out of this subway station, traffic going everywhere, people walking in all directions. And I was waiting there for a friend, and I had this kind of wave of concern and fear, this kind of sense of discomfort. Who are all these people? Where are they going? What are they doing with their lives? What am I doing with my life? What does it mean to live? How should I be living my own life? I think for most of us, if we've ever practiced some spiritual teachings, it's usually in response to some sort of existential angst or crisis. Sure, maybe we learnt from our parents, or perhaps we were born in a Buddhist culture, but certainly our desire to practice, this energy that lies behind continuing to practice, this is something that results from seeing a little bit, glimpsing certain truths that make us want to inquire, that make us want to look deeper, that makes us want to be better people, makes us want to escape. And so this is some of the feelings that come along with San Vega. This is a cluster of emotions that we might experience in response to seeing something like old age, sickness, and death, or understanding that our actions have consequences. These things should disturb the mind. A spiritual path should disturb us a little bit. They should cause some agitation. They should shake us a little bit. They should be galvanic. They might inspire energy within us. And these are some of the ideas behind this word, Samvega. So Samvega is a word that perhaps is a bit tricky to translate with just one word in English. It comes from this root meaning to tremble, to shake, vij. And there's this intensifying prefix, which means thoroughly shake, thoroughly tremble. And this idea of shaking, of trembling, is something that we find time and time again when the Buddha is talking about this experience of Samvega. And it's something that I like to see I want to share with you in moving picture form. So here is some trembling, here is some shaking. And this is a video of people on a bridge in China. It's a glass bridge very high up in the mountains. And suddenly, very suddenly, people become aware of the fragility of their lives, the fragility of their existence. And how do they respond? So there's a bridge. We see this poor woman. Despair. This man shaking. Look at those legs, trembling. And this man, his wife perhaps laughing. This terror, panic. The sound's down, but she's screaming her head off here. And this poor man crying with fear, unable to move forward. Crying and crawling, trying to block out the view. Looking for a savior, for some shelter. And the Buddha, of course, said there is no such thing as a savior in this world. There's no shelter, no protector. And so when it comes to defining San Vega, this complicated word, we find synonyms like agitation, which can come from joy or despair, ubega. Utrasa, which means a sense of alarm. We saw that in the video. We saw that agitation. We saw that alarm in these people. We saw bhaya, fear, pure, unadulterated terror in those people's eyes. We saw pilana. We saw this pressing down, this oppression, that man crouching on the ground as if the sky was falling on his head. We saw gatana, this shaking, trembling, and this upadawa, this distress. So these are the kind of feelings that come up sometimes when we're confronting the reality of our existence. We see this in English translated as words like agitation, fear, anxiety, thrill, religious emotion, and quite commonly it would be translated as urgency or shock, surprise, awe, religious emotion, dread, alarm, being stirred. And so these complicated emotions, these reactions, these are something that we don't often allow ourselves to feel. In fact, we try to cocoon ourselves from these things. We try to disguise the true nature of reality from us. We spend all of our energy in life actually trying to build up these walls to protect us from coming into contact with these truths. And then from time to time, it'll break through that veil that hides these things from us, becomes frayed or falls, and then suddenly we see things for what they are. It's like that moment in The Wizard of Oz where they see the man behind the curtain and the illusion is shattered and the truth becomes seen. It's like that way that we suddenly become aware that we are impermanent, that there is old age. You look in the mirror and you see the grey hairs and you're like, what? It's true. Or when we get sick, we suddenly are aware of the fragility of the body and we react, we hate it so much, it's so annoying. When the pandemic came along, of course, everyone was suddenly aware of the fragility of life, this world that we had constructed as being safe and secure from these kinds of diseases. All of that was shattered. And people spoke then at the beginning of the pandemic of this spiritual response, this sense of urgency that they had. Suddenly, here we are. Oh, now's the time to practice, we said. This is true. The Buddha was right. There's sickness and there's impermanence and death is certain. And this was true. This is what happened. Suddenly that veil, that curtain that separates us from these truths was removed, and we had to confront the truth of old age, sickness, and death. We had to confront the truth of separation. And it was a moment, but just a moment. And then so quickly we become forgetful. So quickly we become back to normal. We now think about the pandemic as just being a mere irritation. Gone is that sense of urgency. Gone is that sense of now's the time for me to do my spiritual work. We're so blasé again, just like we were before the pandemic. And the truth is that these things are always happening. There's always sickness, there's always war. These things are going on all the time, but we're not looking at them. And so when they come up, when they're forced into our view, we seem surprised by them. But merely being exposed to these things and confronting the truth, just like those people on that bridge, seeing suddenly, how fragile their bodies are, how close to death they might be. This alone is not Samvega. This fear, this discomfort by itself is not Samvega. Samvega requires some sort of response. It's something that will spur us into action. So this is a kind of cluster of feelings that we have. We might have some sort of exposure to a truth, such as old age, sickness, or death, and this might inspire us to reflect upon those things, and as a consequence of that exposure and that reflection, to act, to be motivated. So I'll just continue to share my screen. I'll just quickly go over these themes of Samvega, because it's not all doom and gloom. There's, of course, the ones that I've mentioned already: birth, old age, sickness, and death. There's the brevity of life. There's the certainty of death. There's also the fear of suffering in samsara, the consequences of our actions, and this urgency to escape. But, like I say, it's not all doom and gloom, because there are some positive aspects to Samvega. There's the inspiration that comes, a sense of wonder of what it means to be alive, and also amazement, this seeing something that is so awe-inspiring. And in the suttas, it was things like maybe seeing some psychic powers or seeing the presence of the Buddha. And there's also this positive aspect of Samvega associated with the places that the Buddha attained enlightenment at, where he was born, where he gave his first sermon, and where he died. So these are places that we can go to and experience a positive form of Samvega. We can experience a positive inspiration, something that helps propel us on the spiritual path, because we have this example. Just as when in the story of the Buddha leaving the palace and seeing old age, sickness, and death for the first time, he also encountered the sage, the spiritual practitioner. And so this was a positive form of Samvega, that he can experience some growth as a result of these things. And I asked you before, have you experienced Samvega in your own life? Have you had this experience of inspiration that drove you to practice more, that shook you, that agitated your mind, that made you want to practice the Dhamma? And have you had this sense of an uncanny experience? Have the hairs on your arms or the back of your neck been raised? So this is a common response to Samvega. It's one of my favorite words in English, horripilation. This is goosebumps, gooseflesh. And this is something that comes along with this sense of Samvega, this urgency, this hair-raising. It makes you in tune suddenly with something that perhaps had been neglected by your awareness. It's like when you hear someone has died and you get a little shiver up your spine, or when you hear a good teaching and you get a wave of goosebumps over your body, or when you think about a theme of the Dhamma and it gives you a chill and propels you to practice. So this is an important part of Samvega, lomitasa. This is the gooseflesh that happens. And it happens quite frequently in our life, and perhaps we don't pay attention to it. And it's a way of perhaps getting in touch, our body, our awareness, our subconscious, becoming in touch with something a little bit uncanny and a little bit weird and awe-inspiring that we don't often turn our attention to. And so this is something we see all the time in the suttas. We see someone saying, I had this, experience, and then I had this wave of Samvega and the hair stood up on my arms. And so this is something that maybe we might have experienced a little bit of ourselves in our own lives, this strange, uncanny feeling. And I think it's important to point this out because so much of our lives can be so boring and mundane. And yet there's opportunities always where our body or our mind is gently nudging us towards Samvega, to spiritual practice, making us think about these things. And it's up to us to pay attention to those moments, to ask, why is this happening? What does this mean? And so I mentioned that there's the suffering of samsara, and this is something that is encapsulated in these commentarial remarks on what Samvega is. So we have rebirth, aging, sickness and death, and then fear of suffering in the lower realms, suffering in the past that is rooted in the grounds of samsara that causes suffering in the present, suffering in the future, and suffering that is rooted in this need to search for nutrients, for food. And so those moments when we're in touch with this little bit of Samvega, where our hairs rise on our body and we glimpse a fraction, a tiny fraction of what suffering really is. But this is, of course, nothing in the big picture of things. The suffering in our own lives is minuscule compared to the huge amount of suffering that we've been through over countless lives. And it's this awareness of this big picture, which the Buddha pointed to in his teachings, this broadening of our understanding of our experience, that it isn't just limited to this life, but there's countless lives where we have been born, grown old, grown sick, and died, where we have been separated from all that is dear and pleasing to us, where we have abided because of our karma. And the Buddha said that one person alone, the bones that they've had in their past lives would be greater than a giant mountain. And so this big picture, this is something that the Buddha wanted us to connect with. And this feeling of Samvega, this disquiet, this discomfort, this fear, this is something that should discomfort us, that should create fear in our mind, that should galvanize us into action. Seeing this, we shouldn't forget these things. We don't want to be those spiritual practitioners who say, yes, yes, I memorized the teachings. Yes, yes, I chanted this. Yes, yes, I learnt that. Oh, I've already heard about old age, sickness and death. I get it. And then at the end of their life, find that they haven't taken much of an interest in those teachings at all. They haven't learnt, they haven't synthesized this information in a way that's going to help them come out of suffering, to escape the round of samsara. And so I'll just go over this process that the Buddha outlines, because it's helpful to see how this actually works, that Samvega isn't just an idea or a concept, but it's a process, that it's something that happens over time. So we have this initial experience, could be positive or confronting. It gives us an awareness of reality. We develop some fear or perhaps some inspiration out of that. This is the Samvega coming up. Gives us this hair-raising amazement. And then this desire to be free from this big picture suffering of samsara. Then there is exertion. This is energy. And hopefully there's a sense of calmness and peace that comes along with accepting nature as it is. So this is something we see all the time in the suttas. I had Samvega, amazing, wonderful. I had goosebumps, but then I felt calm and serene. And hopefully this experience of Samvega will lead us to liberation. And so there's a link between Samvega and energy. And there's a link between energy and right effort, that path factor of samavayama, where we exert ourselves to prevent unarisen, unwholesome states from arising, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. This is abandoning bad actions, bad speech, bad behavior, bad thoughts, abandoning the defilements, abandoning the hindrances in our practice. And so we want to prevent and abandon unwholesomeness in our lives. And instead, we want to develop unarisen, wholesome states in our practice. And we want to maintain those wholesome states. So this is the fourfold division of samavayama, right effort, to prevent unwholesome states, to abandon unwholesome states, to develop wholesome states, and to maintain those wholesome states. And so there's a link between right effort and energy and Samvega. Samvega inspires energy. Samvega is like a nutriment for energy in the mind. And this is what helps us to practice our right effort. Without that energy, it's just pure fear and terror. It's just like those people on the bridge. They're in terror, they're in fear, they're shaking, but they're not doing anything to overcome it. They're not going to perhaps investigate why this fear is there on a deep level, not just the fear that comes from seeing that this life is impermanent, that this life is brief and short and vulnerable, but the bigger picture fear of ongoing suffering in samsara. So we need to do more than just experience terror or fear. We need to actually work with it, to practice with it. And there's a sutta called the Lion Sutta, which is one of my favorite suttas. There's a lion who roars in the jungle, and this loud roar, this terrifies all the beings in the jungle. It causes all the animals to scurry back to their homes. It causes even the elephants, the biggest creatures in the jungle, to wet the soil with urine, to plop out large elephant poos. That means it causes them to piss and shit in fear and terror when they hear the lion's roar. And the Buddha says that his teaching is like a lion's roar. This lion's roar inspires Samvega. And even the gods, when they hear these teachings, they become scared. They say, oh my gosh, the Buddha has taught on the impermanence of life, the certainty of death, it turns out that we too are impermanent. And they have this panic, this fear, this dread, this terror that comes up. Suddenly that veil that they cocoon themselves away from the reality of their true existence, the fact that they're impermanent, that they are not going to last, that they're still attached to the process of self. Suddenly this becomes aware for them and they experience Samvega. And so this is an important way to think about Samvega. This awareness needs to stimulate us. And there's so many ways that the Buddha talked about ways that we can use Samvega in our practice to inspire us. One of those was at the beginning of the talk. I showed an image to you of someone with their head on fire. I'll share it with you again, because this is how the Buddha suggested that we practice. Said, we should practice as if our head was on fire, or if our clothes were on fire. When we practice in this way, we give up those bad, unskillful qualities. We develop this enthusiasm, this effort, this zeal, this vigor, this perseverance, mindfulness, and situational awareness. So just imagine your head was on fire. You would urgently try to put that fire out. We are on fire. We are in danger. We must urgently practice the path. And this sense of urgency is something that the Buddha talked about in one of my favorite suttas, which is the Sutta of the Goad. I'm not sure if any of you know what a goad is. A goad is like, actually I have a picture here, I'll show you. Goad is a long and pointy stick. Whoop. I share my screen again, forgive the technological slowness. Here we have a goad. This is a long and pointy stick that they use to train animals. And the way they do it, of course, is by sticking it into the animal in order to get it to move. Remember that definition of Samvega: to tremble, to be stirred, to be agitated, to move, to be moved. This is Samvega, and this is what happens with this goad when the owner of the animal pushes it into the skin. And so to finish, I'll just share these 4 images with you that the Buddha taught in this sutta, the Simile of the Goad, where he compares people to horses. So he said, so a horse is, of course, one of the poor animals that would have experienced a goad when it was being trained. And so he said that there's 4 types of people in this world who are like horses. So the first type of horse is the kind of horse that's a quick learner. When it sees just the shadow of the goad, then very quickly it knows, I should move. I should be stirred into action. And so the Buddha said, this is like a person who, just having heard that someone in the next village had died, that person thinking the same thing will happen to me is stirred into action. Just like those gods, they heard, actually, I'm impermanent. I should do something about it. In the same way, when a person hears that someone has died, they think to themselves, I'm of the same nature. How am I living my life? And so this is like a kind of horse that learns quickly. The second kind of horse is a bit slower to learn. This is the kind of horse that when it sees the shadow of the goad, it doesn't move. When it feels the prick into the hairs of its skin, then it thinks, hang on a second, I should move. My master wants me to move. And it's stirred, Samvega'd into action. And this is like the kind of person who actually sees someone who is dead in front of them. They didn't hear about a dead person. They needed to see that body to make it real for themselves. And then they think, I too am of the same nature. How am I living my life? They're stirred into action from seeing the body. But they needed that little bit more than just hearing about death. They needed to see it, like that horse needed to experience the prick in its skin. The next horse that's like a person is the kind of horse that needs to be stuck even deeper into the flesh in order to be stirred, in order to move. So this horse is a bit of a slow learner. It needs a little bit more pain to make it real. This is a person who sees a dead person in front of them, but it's someone that they care for. It's someone that they love. And that's why it matters to them. And maybe this is how most of us are. We know that people are dying out there in the world right now, but it doesn't affect us. It doesn't inspire us to practice the Dhamma. It doesn't motivate us. It doesn't stir us. And of course, maybe that's a way we protect ourselves. We can't be too emotionally invested in every living being's death. But we can be aware that this will happen to me. We shouldn't wait to have an experience that responds to death only in relation to our own attachment, in the way that this person only fears death because a loved one, someone they care for, has died. We shouldn't wait for someone that is near to us, dear to us, for that to become a truth in our minds. But this is how most people will behave. Only when it's someone that matters to them will they go through these process of grief, will they be struck by the truth that all beings must die. And this is what happens when someone dies in our life. There is an opportunity for us to question how we're living. And this is something that people report to me quite frequently, that in the process of grief, there's this unpicking of their own life, this questioning of, well, this person near to me died. What am I doing? How am I living? And so there should be some change that comes from an experience, an association with death. But maybe we shouldn't wait until it's someone close to us to appreciate the significance that all beings are impermanent, that all beings must die. Because this horse, this person, is a bit of a slow learner. And the last horse, the last person, is the horse that doesn't tremble at the shadow of the whip, doesn't move when pricked, doesn't get stirred even when that goad is deep in the flesh. But this horse needs a lot of pain. This horse needs that goad to be stuck deep, deep into the bone. Only then is it real. Only then does the horse think, I should move. A very slow learner. And this horse, the Buddha said, is like a person who doesn't understand, doesn't appreciate, doesn't get that impermanence is real, doesn't understand the significance, the certainty of death, until they are on their deathbed themselves. Only then does it become real. And I've known people like this in my work as a chaplain who don't believe that they're going to die, even when they're in the process of dying. They still have some hope. They still have some illusion that there will be some breakthrough that will save them, that this won't be the time of their death. And they resist and they fight. They're like this slow learning horse that doesn't get it, doesn't appreciate it. Even in the last moments, only then will they become aware of death. And then, of course, it's too late to ask, how am I living my life? It's too late. Your life has been lived, your opportunity has been lost. Possibilities for goodness, wholesomeness, for developing your mind have been wasted. And so we don't want to be like this horse. We don't want to be like that person. We want to be smart. We want to be the kind of horse that just seeing the mere shadow of that whip, of that goad, is stirred, Samvega, into action. And so this is San Vega. Having heard the teachings, having done the reflection on the 5 frequent meditations, how are we living our life? How are you living your life? Do you have energy in your practice? Are you inspired by the Dhamma? Are you maybe closing your eyes a little at the truths of the world? Are you denying the reality of your existence? But a word of caution before I finish up. We don't want to be in a state of constant agitation. We don't want to be in a state of panic, running around. Sure, the Buddha said to practice like your head is on fire, but the idea is to quench that fire, to put it out, not to run around screaming and letting it burn. To quench it out, we need to calm the mind. We need to become more tranquil and find some peace. And so there's some necessity when we practice Samvega to balance it with some acceptance, some kindness, some understanding, and a sense of peace that allows us to have almost like a calm agitation, calm energy that is aware and understands the truth of impermanence, of the certainty of old age, sickness, and death, and yet is peaceful and calm in response. And so this is very important, that we balance our practice of perhaps looking at confronting themes like death or impermanence. We balance that with calming meditations like metta or meditation on the breath, so that we have a balanced mind. The idea isn't to be in a constant state of energetic frenzy and panic about the brevity of life, but to have a sustained and determined practice that is rooted in acceptance and equanimity of the truth of what it means to be alive. And so this is a short talk about Samvega, and I hope that it has been of some benefit to you and that it will help you in your practice.
Sadhu, 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 Bhante, for my sharing is very clear. I think most of us are in the third and fourth type of horse. Okay. Now we are open for Q&A. If any one of you would like to ask some questions, please raise your virtual hand. We will unmute you and you may ask Bhante the question pertaining to this talk.
Feel free to ask a question if you'd like, although some of you are looking a bit scared maybe. Please don't be scared. Or any responses. Have you experienced Samvega in your own life? Was there a particular thing that propelled you further on the spiritual path, something that made you want to practice more? I think most people here probably had something.
Okay. Open to let them unmute. This is very quiet.
There's a question
some questions.
Okay. There's a question from...
You all may unmute. Thanks, Bhante.
So I can see that there's a question in the chat. Shall I respond to that one?
Yes, please, Bhante.
So the question is from Chia Chi Mun. How should we advise our elderly family members to practice Samvega? So it's a good question because you think at the end of someone's life, that's when this urgency would really start to come into play. You'd think that at the end of someone's life, that's when you'd have this keen awareness that your life is quickly diminishing, that your time is running out, that now is the time for spiritual practice. But unfortunately, because of the habit pattern of our mind, it's very difficult as people get older to transform their mind in the same way that they might when they were younger. What happens over the course of our life is that the thoughts we have, the actions we do, the kinds of habits that build up in our mind, these stain the mind, and this becomes our propensity. And then there's this kind of feeling of like just giving up on trying because, you know, they've done a whole life and there's not much left, so why bother? But there's always an opportunity to develop on the spiritual path. And so for people who are older, it's a good opportunity as they get towards the end of their life to reflect upon their good qualities, the things that they've done that have been generous and kind, the satisfaction they can have from perhaps raising a family, and to focus on these things as inspiration. It might not be easy for them to get out and to do a lot more things, but they can definitely work with Chaganusati, this recollection of their good quality, of their generosity, and to develop a mind that is inspired by goodness. And there's also an opportunity for people to practice meditation as they get older. They have less activities to do, and so they have more opportunities to practice meditation. And that's an area where they can see, hopefully, they can expect to see some rapid growth if they put some energy into it. And it's difficult because the habit pattern of people's mind is of such that we will seek comfort and we will seek distraction. We will seek other activities, anything but meditation. And if we haven't lived a good life, if we've not developed our mind in younger years, then it's very difficult sometimes for older people to practice. But this isn't always the case. So I would encourage people who are older to spend some time in reflection and development. So the practice that we did at the beginning of the meditation, this is a patisankha. This is a reflection-based practice. It doesn't require a lot of silence in the mind. It requires a thinking mind. And so for some people who haven't developed their mind through citta bhavana, haven't developed their mind through samadhi practice, they can practice a reflection really easily. They can do guided meditations and things like that. And so in this way, they're inclining their mind towards wholesomeness, inclining their mind towards goodness. But at the same time, we need to be aware that if we wait to the very end of our life, then we've waited too long. The time to act in our spiritual practice is now. We don't know what will come tomorrow. And if we wait until, our deathbed to try and transform our mind, then it's going to be far too late. So regardless of anyone's age, now is the time to start practicing and don't delay. And so someone else has asked here, thank you, Bobby. It would help to be able to see the big picture of suffering in samsara as our single life now. Any analogies? Yes. So there's the Anamatagga Samyutta. I think it's Samyutta number 15. Don't take my word for it. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Anamatagga Sutta, the Sutta of Unknowable Beginnings, which is full of wonderful similes that should slightly disturb and hopefully inspire the mind to practice. These are similes like the amount of tears that you have shed in all of your lives. Is it lesser or greater than the oceans in the world? And the Buddha says, it's greater than all the oceans. And just think about the suffering involved in that. You have been crying life after life after life after life after life. You have had tragedies and separation, sadnesses, grief, so much sadness, so much grief, so many tears, that it's more than the water in all the oceans. And he says that even the amount of blood that has been shed when you are an animal killed for food is greater than all of the blood in the oceans. And this Samyutta is full of these kinds of analogies where we see this big picture. And it's a very beautiful Samyutta. If you can check it out, it should inspire that kind of visceral response of wanting to transform your life. And that's, of course, where we saw that mountain of bones image as well from the Anamatagga Samyutta. Yes, and so Chan is saying here, when you have an urgency to practice initially, it wears off eventually. And that's why it's so good to come and listen to some teachings. And this is why you find from time to time, teachers will really try to inspire you and to force you to look at these things and to challenge you to react in some way. Because we have this tendency to just slip back into a comfortable posture. We just want to sit down on the comfortable chair and relax. And of course, in that moment, it feels good. There's some pleasure in that. But actually what we need is a little bit of energy that moves us forward. We want to keep moving forward in our practice. And so that requires some exertion. We don't want to be too overly caffeinated in our practice. We don't want to become one of those people who's a bit overzealous or a little bit fundamentalist in their practice. And you probably encountered people like that who are a little bit over the top. And there's a word in a phrase in the Zen practice where someone says that these type of people, they stink like Zen. They're doing too much. They're trying too hard. They're being overly they're trying too hard, and they're being probably a bit of an annoyance. So you want to maintain a kind of balance in your life, but you want to be moving forward. You want to be able to see the results of your practice. You want to ensure that you're lessening those unwholesome qualities and multiplying your good qualities. And so it could just be that every day you take a few moments to reflect. How have I lived my life today? Did I do some actions that were bad, that were unwholesome? And what did I do that was good? It could be that once a week you dedicate some time to doing those 5 frequent reflections. And in this way, we touch back into our practice regularly. It's so important that we have this renewal of our practice, that we keep on coming back to our practice, that we don't neglect our practice. And it doesn't have to be, as some people think, we have to go away on a retreat, or we can only do it when the conditions are right, or it needs to be the perfect time of the day, or it has to be this perfect moment. We can't wait for the right conditions. We have to work with what we've got. And for me, just looking around is an opportunity for San Vega. I walk down the street and there's a dead bird. This is the perception of death. I am of the same nature. You look at so many dinner tables. You don't need to go all the way to a cemetery and do a corpse meditation. You can see on dinner tables, these were once living beings. This is perhaps my fate if I don't do good actions in this life. Or when you see an old person, when you see someone who is becoming sick, this will also happen to me. It's about that awareness, shifting our experience so that we don't disguise those truths, that we don't blind ourselves with willful ignorance, that we see these things for what they are. And over time, we build up these perceptions, we build up this awareness of these truths, and they become deeply ingrained in our thinking, so that these things are no longer a surprise to us, that these are something that we accept as spiritual teachings. And then, of course, we need to keep on sprinkling the Dharma throughout our lives. So keep on listening to teachings, keep on reading the suttas, keep on practicing meditation. And over time, these things will help you to move forward in your practice. And so Lena is asking, how can we inspire our children to have Samvega and urgency in their practice? Well, we can't do it for other people. We can't force other people to practice the Dhamma. They need to realize it for themselves as being something important and worth developing. And the best way that we can do that is to be a good example of Dharma practice to them. So many parents I know, and I'm not saying this is you at all, Lena. So many parents I know, when I speak to their young people, they say that there's this gap between how their parents want them to be and what their parents want them to do and learn and to study, and how their parents behave. They'll say things like, our parents want us to take 5 precepts, but there's like a liquor cabinet in our living room. Or our parents say that this is impermanent, yet they keep on living as if every day is permanent. And they see this kind of hypocrisy in their parents. And so if we want to be good spiritual inspirations for our children and for those people around us, then we need to make sure that we're walking the talk, that we're living the path sincerely and trying to cut out as much of that hypocrisy as possible. And so when it comes to San Vega and teaching our young people, you want to make sure that you're doing all the things that you want to in your life. You want to make sure that you're not putting off things for an uncertain future. You want to make sure that your young people see that you're aware of the preciousness of this life and that you don't waste time getting upset about small things, that you don't spend time in arguments, that you are the kind of person who lets go easily and things like that. And that's the way that I would recommend inspiring young people, but not forcing them and not kind of scaring them with the idea of impermanence. I think young people have enough anxiety, but when they're ready to come to these sorts of teachings, just remember that this is a wisdom teaching and that it requires a little bit of life knowledge and development. And it's very true that young people have this belief that they'll live forever and that bad things will never happen to them. But old people like us, having lived a full life, we have glimpses into these things. And for many young people, it's just not in their experience. But one other good thing that could be useful is to allow young people to spend some time with older generations so that they get to see that there is this process of life, and to allow them to see things like death, to allow them to accept these as normal, natural parts of life. And hopefully, if they've got a little bit of wisdom, then this will help transform their minds.